So Prince William just quietly bypassed the entire palace press office to orchestrate a tribute to his mother's 45-year marriage legacy. And the absolute second the gesture happened, it broke nearly 3 decades of forced institutional silence. And honestly, when you understand what he actually did and who he used to do it, you realise this was the ultimate checkmate against Camilla's camp. Before we get into all of it, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss updates as more details come out. Alright, let's start where the story actually begins. And here is the part that actually gets crazy. On the 28th of July, the evening before an anniversary. The palace has explicitly ignored since 1996, 13-year-old Prince George walked into the sunken garden at Kensington Palace. He was not there for a photo opportunity. He was not there because a press secretary told him to go. He was holding something small enough to close inside one hand, a tiny sprig of myrtle, and he quietly pressed it into the soil at the base of Princess Diana's statue. Like, this is where it stops being just a family story about a grandson and a grandmother. You have to understand the security, the protocol, and the sheer weight of the bureaucracy at these palaces to really grasp what a big deal this is. You do not just go for a random stroll and plant things on royal grounds. You just do not. Every single blade of grass at Kensington Palace is managed. Every movement of a future king is logged by protection officers. Nobody in the press office approved this visit. Nobody on the communications team even knew it was happening. The entire machinery that controls the royal image was completely left in the dark. But George did not just find that specific type of myrtle growing next to a sidewalk in London. It does not work like that. You cannot just buy this stuff at a local flower shop. Someone with immense overriding authority had to authorize cutting a sacred royal wedding flower for a garden that has never ever hosted a royal wedding. That person was Prince William, and he did it without asking for permission from anyone above him. He completely bypassed the private secretaries, the equerries, and the communications directors, who spend their entire lives managing these specific dates. And honestly, when the news of what happened in that garden reached the king's desk the very next morning, it sent an absolute shockwave through the entire institution. We are talking about a total halt to the morning briefings. The staff basically froze. Because for almost 30 years, the official rule has been absolute silence. You do not talk about the 29th of July. You do not acknowledge the wedding of Charles and Diana. You let the date pass as if it is just another random Wednesday. That was the unwritten law of the modern monarchy enforced by everyone from the top down. It was the one rule you did not break if you wanted to keep your job in that building. So when the future king and his eldest son completely ignore that law, they are not just breaking protocol. They are not just being sentimental for the sake of a nice memory. They are sending a massive, unignorable signal to the people currently running the palace. They are proving that the old rules do not apply to them anymore. And the fact that they did it using the exact historical symbol of royal marriages just makes the statement 10 times louder. Think about what it takes for a 13-year-old boy to walk out there, knowing the historical weight of what he is holding, and place it at a monument the establishment prefers to ignore. It is a staggering image. It is the kind of thing that completely derails a multi-million-pound public relations strategy because it is so incredibly simple and so incredibly undeniable. But what King Charles did next, once the shock wore off, and he realised what his son and grandson had just done, nobody saw it coming. And I think that is the detail that made everyone in that building stop cold. Now here is what makes this even more significant. To really understand why a tiny flower caused an absolute meltdown behind palace doors, you have to understand what myrtle actually is in the royal family. We are not talking about a basic garden weed here. We are not talking about a random flower you buy at a corner shop to make a bouquet look pretty. We are talking about a living contract. Since 1858, every single royal bride has carried a sprig of myrtle grown from one specific bush at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. It started with Queen Victoria's eldest daughter. It is basically the ultimate symbol of royal legitimacy. It is the dividing line between being a celebrity and being an anointed member of the British royal family. When you hold that flower, you are officially part of the institution. When Diana married Charles in 1981, she carried myrtle from that exact same lineage. When Catherine married William in 2011, she did the exact same thing. It is the one unbroken thread connecting every royal woman who marries into the top tier of the family. So by taking that specific flower and having George plant it at Diana's statue, William was not just having a sweet family moment. He was making a deeply calculated institutional move. Think about what that actually means for a second. He was legally and symbolically linking her right back to the crown. He was taking the ultimate symbol of royal establishment approval and giving it back to the woman the establishment spent decades trying to push out. Basically, he was telling the establishment that you cannot separate Diana from the monarchy's history. You cannot just crop her out of the picture because she makes the current administration uncomfortable. The myrtle proves she was there. It proves she was chosen. It proves she is the foundation of the line of succession that is sitting right in front of them. You have to realize how much the palace relies on symbols, because they cannot always speak plainly. When they want to validate someone, they give them a title or a patron role. When they want to erase someone, they slowly remove those symbols. By placing the myrtle at the statue, William was essentially forcing the highest symbol of royal acceptance back into his mother's narrative. It is pretty much the most direct institutional defiance we have seen from William in years. He bypassed the entire machinery of the palace to make a point that no press release could ever make, and to understand why this matters so much to him personally, why he felt the need to make such a sharp, undeniable move right now. You need to understand what has been happening behind the scenes for the last few decades, because the people working for Camilla have been treating the royal narrative like their own personal property. And that detail, that is the one that changes everything you thought you knew about this family dynamic. But to truly understand why William could do this without flinching, you have to go back. You have to look at the history they are fighting over. Most people remember the fairy tale wedding in 1981, the dress with the massive train, the incredible crowds on the streets, the global broadcast watched by an estimated 750 million people. What most people forget is how hard the palace fought to contain Diana almost immediately afterward. And honestly, here is the part that genuinely turns the stomach when you look back at it. When Diana shook hands with a dying AIDS patient in 1987 without wearing gloves, the old guard hated it. They absolutely despised it. You have to remember the context of the 1980s. There was massive fear, massive stigma. People honestly thought you could catch the virus just by being in the same room. And the palace advisors, the senior courtiers who ran the firm, they thought her actions were too raw, too human, too completely out of step with what a royal was supposed to be. They wanted her waving from balconies at a safe distance. They wanted her cutting ribbons and standing behind velvet ropes. They did not want her sitting on hospital beds, looking into the eyes of people the rest of society had abandoned. 10 years later, in 1997, when she walked through a cleared minefield in Angola wearing body armour, they had the exact same reaction. They called it a stunt. They called her a loose cannon. And for almost 30 years, the strategy of the people who survived her has been to treat her like a tragic footnote. They framed her as a closed chapter, a brief, chaotic, overly emotional era of the monarchy that they luckily survived and moved past. They pushed this narrative that she was a rogue element, rather than acknowledging that she actually saved them from becoming completely irrelevant. William grew up watching this happen in real time. He watched his mother's blueprint for the monarchy, the empathy, the direct contact, the emotional honesty, get stripped away and criticised. He remembers going to homeless shelters with her. He remembers exactly what she was trying to build. And then as the years went on, he watched that exact same blueprint get quietly rebranded by the very people who pushed her out. They took her methods, applied them to their own engagements, and pretended they invented them. Like, this is not a new fight. This goes back further than most people realise. William has been carrying this for decades. He knows exactly who was in the room when his mother was being marginalised. He knows exactly who briefed the press against her to protect his father's image. He lived through the psychological warfare of the 1990s. So when he sees those exact same tactics being used today to protect Camilla's image at the expense of Diana's memory, it hits a nerve that has been raw since 1997. This is decades of pain finally finding an outlet. He finally has the power, the rank, and the complete independence to say no. And what Camilla's team was trying to do right before this 45th anniversary makes his reaction completely understandable. In fact, it makes it even darker. And this is the detail that stopped me cold when I first read it. The plan was staggering in its ambition, and honestly staggering in its sheer audacity. Camilla's senior aides had reportedly spent 18 months drafting a massive comprehensive strategy for King Charles's upcoming legacy speech. We are talking about a major historically defining address designed to frame exactly how history will remember Charles's reign and his modernization of the monarchy. This is the kind of speech that goes into the history books. It dictates the official record and the goal of Camilla's camp: to completely restructure the narrative and bypass Diana entirely. They literally circulated internal memos demanding absolute zero acknowledgement of the 29th of July anniversary. They wanted to officially cement the idea that Charles alone modernized the crown, with Camilla as his steadfast stabilizing partner from the very beginning. They wanted to write a version of history where the humanitarian shifts of the 1980s and 90s were just a natural evolution of the institution, completely ignoring the 19-year-old girl who actually forced those changes into existence. Does any of that sound like respect for history? Or does it sound like deep institutional insecurity, wearing a public relations mask? They had the media blackout locked in. They had briefed the friendly journalists to not bring up the anniversary. They told the Royal Rota to focus entirely on Charles's upcoming engagements and completely ignore the historical date. They had the schedule meticulously cleared of any memorials or nods to the past. She had been building toward this for years. They wanted to permanently downgrade Diana from the co-architect of the modern monarchy to a mere historical blip, a footnote about a failed first marriage, and they were one step away from pulling it off. They thought they had every base covered, every calendar managed, and every aid in line. They thought the silence was finally permanent, but they completely miscalculated one person. And that single miscalculation brought their entire 18-month strategy crashing down. Okay, so here is the part that actually changes everything. A few weeks before the anniversary, Prince George was looking at a photograph from 1981. Just a normal kid looking at family history. And he simply asked his dad what his grandmother was holding in her giant wedding bouquet. William did not just answer the question with a simple history lesson. It triggered something. He started looking into how the palace was actually planning to handle the upcoming 45th anniversary. And because he is the Prince of Wales, he has access to absolutely everything. He does not have to submit a request. He just asks to see the plans. And what he found was the Blackout Directive. He discovered that the gardening staff at Kensington Palace had actually been explicitly instructed not to place any special arrangements near the sunken garden statue that week. Think about that for a second. A direct written order to the palace gardeners to make sure the memorial looked completely routine on a major historical anniversary. They were actively policing the flowers to ensure the erasure was complete. What William found in that directive changed the entire picture. It was not just passive forgetting anymore. It was not just people moving on with their lives and accidentally missing a date. It was an active, coordinated erasure. It was a hostile strategy. And the moment he realized that the whole story shifts, he realized that if he did not step in, right then and there the erasure would become the permanent official record. He saw exactly what Camilla's aides were trying to do with his father's legacy speech. And he knew that confronting them in a screaming match in a drawing room would just lead to leaks and spin and endless palace drama in the Sunday papers. If he complained through official channels, Camilla's team would just spin it to the press that William was being emotional or clinging to the past. He needed something cleaner. He needed something they could not argue with. He needed a move that did not require a single spoken word, but carried the weight of the entire institution. What he decided to do next was genuinely brilliant, because it used the exact rules of the monarchy against the people trying to manipulate them. He did not make a speech. He did not give a television interview. He did not leak his frustration to a friendly reporter. He just quietly orchestrated a move they could not possibly undo. William bypassed the communications team entirely. He went directly to the head gardener at Kensington Palace and authorised a cutting from their own private myrtle stock. Now you have to understand the specific administrative power dynamics at play here to really get why this move was so devastating. The head gardener at Kensington Palace does not answer to the King's press secretary in London. They answer directly to the estate authority, which is overseen by the Prince of Wales through the Duchy of Cornwall and royal private estate holdings. As Prince of Wales, William holds overriding authority over the Kensington Palace estate grounds. He did not need to submit an administrative request to Clarence House or Buckingham Palace. He did not need an equerry to draft a formal authorisation letter. He simply picked up the phone, spoke to senior estate staff, and authorised a cutting under his own private executive seal. This is stock descended directly from the plant Diana used for her wedding bouquet in 1981. He did it quietly under his own explicit authority, without dropping a single clue to his father's communications team. He did not run it by the King's private secretary. He did not ask the royal communications officers to prepare a draft press release or an off-the-record briefing. He just used his absolute authority as the future monarch to procure the one symbol that the establishment could never ignore. And this is where the sheer genius of the move becomes undeniable, when you break it down step by step, by handing that sprig of myrtle directly to Prince George and having him plant it at the base of Diana's statue. William made the tribute completely untouchable. Think about the impossible dilemma he created for Camilla's communications team. Camilla's senior aides could not order the gardening staff to remove it. You cannot send an officer or a gardener into the sunken garden at midnight to dig up and throw away a tribute planted by a 13-year-old future king for his late grandmother. If they touched it, if they ordered a groundskeeper to quietly sweep it away before sunrise, the optics would be catastrophic. Lower-level staff and security personnel would instantly witness the act. In a palace where security logs record every movement trying to secretly remove a royal tribute planted by the second in line to the throne would leak within hours. They would look like absolute monsters on the front page of every global newspaper. And William knew this. He knew that the protective circle around Prince George was completely airtight. Protection officers from the Royalty and Specialist Protection Command had logged George's entry into the garden at precisely 8:45 in the evening. Every step was recorded on internal security logs. If anyone attempted to tamper with that soil after the young prince left, those security logs would show exactly who gave the order and who carried it out. The decisiveness of this maneuver was staggering. No press release, no exhausting negotiations with his father's staff, no heads up to the king's private secretary. William did not ask for permission because he knew permission would be delayed endlessly, debated, and ultimately denied by advisors trying to protect Camilla's image. Instead, he just firmly, quietly placed his mother's legacy back on the institutional chessboard in a way that checkmated the entire public relations operation. He let the action speak entirely for itself. The myrtle was in the ground. The statement was made. And Charles had absolutely no idea that the decisive move of his reign had already been made by his own son. The morning of the 29th of July, King Charles was briefed on what his son and grandson had done the night before. The private secretary walked into the king's morning study with the daily security and operational summary. And right there in the notes was the log from Kensington Palace. And here is the thing: nobody announced anything to the media. Nobody made a public statement. There was no royal seal on a piece of parchment declaring what had happened. But the message was completely undeniably clear to everyone working inside that building. The 18-month embargo on the 45th anniversary had been dismantled in less than 30 seconds by a 13-year-old boy holding a piece of greenery. When the king read the entry, detailing how Prince George had knelt at his grandmother's statue and pressed the myrtle into the soil, the atmosphere in the private office changed instantly. Camilla's advisors were already gathering in the corridor, anticipating a crisis management meeting to discuss how to keep the story out of the press. They expected the king to express frustration at William for stepping outside the official press office boundaries. They expected a tense phone call between Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace to enforce administrative discipline. Instead of getting angry, instead of calling an emergency council, meeting or demanding an explanation from William Charles did something that shocked his own staff to the core. He looked down at his official daily diary, a schedule meticulously organised, months in advance, by senior courtiers, and picked up his pen. He crossed out an official morning appointment that had been booked for weeks. He told his private secretary that his morning engagements were delayed. Then he put on his coat, walked out of the residence, and headed straight to the sunken garden, completely alone. No Queen Camilla by his side, no press photographers tipping off the royal rota, no courtiers hovering 5 paces behind, holding umbrellas or carrying official briefing folders. Just a king standing with his hands jammed deep into his coat pockets, looking down at the exact patch of soil where his grandson had placed the myrtle less than 12 hours earlier. To an outsider passing through the public grounds at a distance, that might look like nothing. Just an elderly man taking an early morning walk through a quiet garden on a Wednesday. But in the hyper-calibrated world of the British monarchy, every single gesture carries massive institutional meaning. Royal movements are never random. A monarch does not alter a state diary without sending a message to the entire household. For a reigning king to physically alter his official schedule to stand at his ex-wife's memorial on the 45th anniversary of their wedding, without his current queen present, is an absolute institutional earthquake. It was a total departure from nearly 30 years of rigid protocol. It was Charles silently, unmistakably validating what his son and grandson had done. He was sending a direct signal to his own private office: the blackout is over. By standing at that exact spot, the king was personally acknowledging the history that his own advisors had spent 18 months trying to airbrush out of existence. The dynamic inside the palace shifted in a single instant. The blackout strategy was not just broken, it was officially overridden by the monarch himself. Charles did not need to issue a statement or argue with his advisors. His physical presence at that statue on that specific morning completely dismantled the entire public relations narrative that Camilla's team had so carefully built. But the full public relations fallout for Camilla's camp had not even landed yet, and Camilla's team went into immediate full-scale damage control mode, within hours of the king returning to his study. There was this wave of frantic, behind-the-scenes panic spreading through the communications departments because they realized their entire media strategy had collapsed. They had spent over a year and a half setting up a flawless narrative for Charles's upcoming legacy address, and it had been completely dismantled in less than 24 hours by a sprig of greenery and a cancelled morning appointment. Senior advisors were holding emergency phone calls with friendly media contacts, trying to figure out how to manage the story before it broke globally. But here is where their entire public relations machinery fell completely apart. You cannot spin a 13-year-old boy honouring his dead grandmother. You cannot brief the press against a child without completely destroying your own moral credibility. In the world of royal journalism, there are unwritten rules. Journalists know when a palace source is leaking out of genuine public interest, and when they are leaking out of petty administrative panic. The specific details of George's visit quietly leaked to Hello magazine within 48 hours. It did not happen through a coordinated press release issued by the royal rota. It happened through the simple fact that too many human beings, gardeners, security officers, estate workers, low-level household staff, had witnessed the event. When a moment carries that much emotional truth, the working staff at the palace are not going to keep it a secret, just to protect an advisor's strategic memo. The truth spread through the building like wildfire. Camilla's advisors tried one last desperate maneuver to regain control of the narrative. They began quietly whispering to friendly reporters off the record, suggesting that the Myrtle visit was just a minor unplanned family coincidence. They tried to frame it as just a young kid picking up a random piece of garden foliage because he liked the look of it, completely detached from any historical anniversary. But absolutely nobody in the media bought it. The symbolism was too precise. The timing was too exact. You do not just accidentally source historical wedding myrtle descended from Queen Victoria's lineage and plant it at a specific monument on the exact eve of a 45th wedding anniversary. The press office looked ridiculous trying to pretend it was a coincidence. Camilla had spent decades outmaneuvering institutional rivals who constantly underestimated her strategic intelligence. She had successfully navigated her way from being dubbed the most disliked woman in Britain during the late 1990s to being crowned Queen at Westminster Abbey, because her team knew how to play the long game of media management. But William had never underestimated her team. Not once in his adult life. He knew every single tool in their PR playbook. He knew which journalists they called, which phrases they used in background briefings, and how they used leaks to control the narrative. So instead of fighting them in the press, he built a trap using undeniable royal symbolism. A trap they could not spin their way out of, without looking cold and ruthless. The collapse of their strategy was complete. You could see it in the sudden, eerie silence from the communications office. The loud, confident leaks about Charles's upcoming solo legacy speech suddenly stopped entirely. The briefings about how Charles alone had modernised the monarchy were pulled from schedule. Camilla's advisors realised they had been completely outplayed by a father and son who did not need to issue a single press release or raise their voices to win. But they were about to face a permanent consequence they never saw coming. And then just a few days later, Prince William delivered the final move that made it completely impossible for anyone in the palace to pretend anymore. He essentially forced Buckingham Palace to issue an internal confirmation that King Charles is now actively rewriting his legacy address to include a major public reflection on Diana's impact. William did not accomplish this by throwing a public tantrum or leaking private arguments to the tabloids. He accomplished it through ironclad institutional alignment. He officially connected the Royal Foundation's major upcoming mental health initiatives directly to his mother's pioneering work from the late 1980s and 1990s, placing the connection firmly into official household documentation. He wove his father's stewardship of the crown, together with his mother's original humanitarian blueprint, taking the draft writer's pen right out of Camilla's advisor's hands. Through joint briefings between the Prince of Wales's office and the King's Private Secretary's office, William ensured that the upcoming legacy speech will explicitly credit Diana as a foundational co-architect of the modern accessible monarchy. Think about what that actually means in terms of palace history. He ensured that the King's official address will explicitly highlight the exact moments the old guard courtiers hated. 30 years ago, the touching of AIDS patients without gloves, the unscripted hospital bed, visits the emotional openness, and the breaking of centuries-old royal formality. He forced the palace bureaucracy to formally admit that the survival and popularity of the crown today rely on the exact methods Diana introduced 45 years ago. The speech drafting team had no choice but to accept the revisions. William's office provided historical documentation and specific language that integrated Diana's legacy into the official narrative of the reign. The 18-month strategy, designed by Camilla's camp to reduce Diana to a forgotten footnote, was completely shredded. No shouting matches in palace corridors, no dramatic leaks to Sunday newspapers, just a quiet, ruthless, and legally binding confirmation that Princess Diana's name will be spoken by the King as a primary builder of the modern royal house. And that was it. The entire battle was over. Done. The media blackout was officially dead and buried. The long-running attempt to rewrite the historical record had completely failed. The internal palace directives demanding silence were quietly archived and discarded. But what this entire episode actually reveals about the future of the British monarchy, and what it tells us about the man who will eventually wear the crown, is the part that every viewer needs to sit with. When you step back and look at the entire chain of events from start to finish, what you're actually witnessing is a massive historic generational shift in royal power. This was never just about a flower placed in the dirt on a Tuesday evening. It was never just about a cancelled morning appointment or a disputed anniversary. This was a decisive battle over who owns the historical narrative of the British monarchy. Camilla's camp tried to build a legacy strategy that operated on the convenient fiction that the 1980s and 1990s never happened. They wanted a streamlined, polished history. They wanted a straight, clean line leading from Charles's youth directly to his coronation, with no messy emotional disruptions or uncomfortable memories along the way. But in their arrogance, they built their own trap. They walked right into it, because they assumed that controlling the palace communications office gave them the power to control what the public is allowed to remember. Prince William proved that he far better than any courtier or public relations consultant in London understands an essential truth. Diana's legacy and the crown's long-term survival are no longer separate questions. They are two sides of the exact same coin. You cannot erase the mother of the future king without erasing the very foundation that makes the monarchy relatable and acceptable to the modern public. The 15-year-old boy who stood in the freezing rain in 1997, walking silently behind his mother's coffin while millions watched in heartbreak, is now 40-something years old, and the most powerful man in Britain behind the king. He does not act out of paranoia. He does not act out of impulsive emotion. He does not get drawn into petty palace gossip or minor social media drama. He operates with absolute quiet and devastating strategic precision. He is actively protecting the structural integrity of the monarchy by ensuring that its true architect is never airbrushed out of the picture. He understands the long game of British history clearer than anyone else sitting in those palace offices. He knows that power in the royal family does not come from briefing friendly journalists or drafting clever spin memos. Real power comes from authenticity, historical truth, and the quiet strength of symbolic action. He is not rewriting history to suit a public relations strategy. He is just finally writing it in permanent ink.